In 1979, he adopted 9 black girls. See how they are now. 46 years later, the year was 1979, and Richard Miller's life had narrowed to silence. His wife Anne had been gone for 2 years, and the house they once dreamed of filling with children was still and hollow. At 34, Richard spent most evenings at his kitchen table, staring at the same cracked wallpaper, listening to a clock that seemed to mock him with every tick. People in town said he should remarry, move on, start over. But Richard didn't want to start over. He wanted to keep a promise and once whispered as she lay in a hospital bed, frail and fading, "Don't let love die with me. Give it somewhere to go." Richard wasn't a wealthy man. He was a high school history teacher in a small, predominantly white town in Ohio, but his heart had a capacity that most couldn't comprehend. One rainy Tuesday, he walked into the county social services office. He didn't ask for a baby. He didn't ask for a boy to carry on his name. He asked for the children who had been waiting the longest. The caseworker, a woman named Mrs. Gable, looked at him over her spectacles and pulled a thick, dusty file. It contained the names of 9 sisters, biological siblings ranging from ages 3 to 12, who had been shuffled through 6 different foster homes in 3 years. Because of their number and the racial climate of the era, the state was preparing to split them up across 3 different counties. The day Richard drove his battered wood-paneled station wagon to the receiving home, the air was thick with the scent of pine and nervousness. 9 pairs of eyes watched him from the porch. They were guarded, their hair unkempt, their small suitcases held together with duct tape and hope. The eldest, Sarah, who was 12, stood at the front like a tiny soldier, shielding her younger sisters. She didn't trust this white man with the soft voice and the worn corduroy jacket. She had seen kindness before, and it usually had an expiration date. But Richard didn't try to hug them or force a smile. He simply knelt so he was at their eye level, handed Sarah the keys to the house, and said, "It's your home. I'm just the guy who pays the taxes." The first year was a chaotic symphony of scorched oatmeal, midnight nightmares, and the steep learning curve of a single white father trying to figure out how to properly care for black hair. Richard spent his weekends at the local library, reading everything he could find, eventually befriending an elderly black woman down the street named Mrs. Evelyn who taught him that love wasn't just a feeling, it was a series of actions, like the rhythmic motion of braiding hair on a Sunday evening. There were moments of deep tension. The town didn't always approve. Richard found "Go home" scrawled on his mailbox, and some neighbors stopped inviting him to Sunday potlucks. But every time he looked at his dinner table, now overflowing with laughter, arguments over mashed potatoes, and the vibrant life of 9 sisters who refused to be broken, the outside world faded away. The middle years were the hardest. As the girls entered their teens, they faced the complexities of identity that Richard couldn't always explain. He didn't try to pretend he understood their struggle. Instead, he made sure they were surrounded by mentors who did. He drove them 2 towns over every Sunday to a black church so they wouldn't lose their roots. He stood at every track meet, every choir concert, and every parent-teacher conference, a lone tall man in the back of the room, beaming with a pride that was palpable. When the 4th daughter, Maya, was told by a guidance counselor that she should look into vocational school instead of university, Richard was in the principal's office the next morning with a stack of her straight-A report cards, demanding an apology and a path to the Ivy League. By the late 90s, the house began to quiet down again, but this time, the silence was different. It wasn't the silence of grief, it was the peaceful silence of a job well done. One by one, the girls flew the nest. Sarah became a civil rights attorney, Maya became a neurosurgeon, the twins, Hope and Grace, opened a nonprofit for foster youth. They didn't just survive, they thrived. They became the women the world told them they could never be. And through it all, Richard stayed in that same house with the cracked wallpaper, which he eventually replaced with hundreds of framed photos of graduations, weddings, and eventually, grandchildren. Now, it is 2026 to 46 years since that rainy day at the social services office. Richard is 81 years old, and his hair is the color of a winter cloud. Last month, the 9 sisters, now women in their 50s and 60s, organized a reunion that took over an entire hotel ballroom. They didn't just come alone, they brought their children and grandchildren, a legacy of nearly 50 people who exist because one man decided that a promise to his late wife was more important than the comfort of a quiet life. As Richard sat in the center of the head table, Sarah, now a grandmother herself, stood up to give a toast. She didn't call him Mr. Miller, and she didn't call him her guardian. She looked at him with tears in her eyes and whispered into the microphone, "In 1979, the world saw 9 statistics. But you looked at us and saw a family. You didn't give us a house, you gave us a horizon." The room erupted in a standing ovation that lasted for minutes, a thunderous sound of love that drowned out the ticking of any clock. Richard Miller's life didn't end in the silence of 1979, it multiplied into a symphony that will play for generations to come. He proved that family isn't defined by the blood in your veins, but by the courage in your heart to stay when everyone else leaves.